So good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for being here. I'm Professor Sue Harrison. I'm the Deputy Vice Chancellor for Research and Internationalization, and the UCT Press has been one of the things which has been on my portfolio over the last few years. I'd really like to start by welcoming the Interim VC, Professor Daya Reddy, the Executive Director of UCT Libraries, Ujala Satko, Professor Craig Sudin, who will join us shortly, the outgoing Chair of the UCT Press Board, Professor Dick Nyamga, members of the UCT Press Board, both past and present, colleagues from fellow presses and publishing houses, fellow academics, friends, and to everybody who's online, welcome. This is indeed a big day for the UCT Press and for the University of Cape Town, the day we formally bring UCT Press home and relaunch it at UCT. This process has been underway for quite some time. Actually, right throughout my DVC term, this process has been underway, and I'm approaching the end of the period of 5 years, and we've been walking quite a complex path, and so we're really pleased to relaunch UCT Press today, and your presence here as stakeholders and friends is so important. UCT Press was first launched in 1994 within UCT and run through the Center for African Studies. However, after a few years, in 1998, it was decided to move the press to a commercial publisher, Juta. This period under a commercial publisher, with peer review provided through UCT, has allowed us to build the press, but it did not result in the flourishing of to its potential. And more recently, differing drivers of the commercial environment in the university press opened the way for a rethink. The UCT Press Board embraced this, and through careful planning and analysis, brought forward a model to enable the pivoting towards open access publishing, while maintaining a print-on-demand publishing route too. So after more than 25 years under the management of the publishing house Juta and Company, we are relaunching UCT Press on a UCT Libraries open access publishing platform, supported by publishing and distribution capability provided by African Sun Media for the handling of print-on-demand and hard copy handling, including that of the existing stock, which I think our authors would like to know we are handling well, and its distribution. The diversity in academic publishing needs and the history of UCT Press as a publisher of hard copy materials has guided this integrated route forward, in which we plan and will work towards increasing the unfolding open access publishing as a mainstay of UCT Press, but also facilitating a print-on-demand approach. UCT's open access policy is an important part of our social justice agenda, which underpins Vision 2030. The policy makes our research as widely accessible as possible, removing significant barriers that exist to traditional academic print publishing in the traditional academic print publishing media. These barriers are pertinent to constraining Africa's knowledge generation from taking its rightful place, and are particularly punitive to the sharing of knowledge from global south to global south, where often paywalls in one direction or the other impact us. So the approach of UCT Press is well aligned with the theme of this year's International Open Access Week, to be held from the 23rd to the 29th of October next week. And this centers on community over commercialization. The theme encourages conversations on approaches to open scholarship that enable us to prioritize the best interests of the public and the academic community. It aligns with the UNESCO recommendation on open science, which highlights the need to prioritize community over commercialization in its calls for the prevention of, and I quote, inequitable extraction of profit from publicly funded scientific activities, close quote, as well as the support for, and I quote, non-commercial publishing models and collaborative publishing models with no article processing charges, end quote. For us in Africa, there are far more challenges to equitable publishing. These include a biased publishing system, and our new model of the UCT Press is taking back our scholarship from commercial entities and making that accessible to all Africans, in fact to everybody. All Africans that have access to the internet. In so doing, UCT Press ensures no compromise on academic rigor. There's an explicit commitment to continuing to uphold the highest academic standards. This implies having peer reviews that understand our context and having a commitment to strengthen the manuscript as opposed to immediate rejection and trashing of it if it doesn't meet the quality required. And the reviewing for our relaunched UCT Press actually works with the same press board that we were working with previously. So bringing the press back to UCT is in some way committing to a diamond open access, wherever possible, ensuring no cost to author or reader. We will achieve this for UCT authors and minimize the cost to external authors. In the diamond open access, the institutional funding agencies cover the technical costs of production. The academic process, development of the manuscript and peer review process is done as part of the roles and responsibilities of the academic, and it's paid for by the university through salaries, and should not be a cost to the university and its communities to pay for that which it has already funded. So how are we doing this? As part of UCT's commitment to open access publishing, the university has set aside book publishing charges for the publication of books of UCT authors through the Open Access Press. These will cover the particular editing and other services that cannot be done within the institution, such as typesetting. From the author's point of view, the process of publication will be no different to any other scholarly publisher, with the workflow that ensures the highest level of academic rigor. And we're very excited that this workflow is an online workflow. The process includes full peer review of the manuscript, with reviewers nominated by the UCT Press editorial board. And just like under Juta, any book published by UCT Press will be produced in line with the Department of Higher Education and Training's criteria and can be submitted to DHET for the publication count. And so, in having social responsiveness as part of our vision, our mission, Publishing Open contributes to this mission by sharing scholarship for the growth of society. And we see this open access to scholarship as a potential for contributing to the advancement of the academy, be it at UCT or any other institution within this country and continent. So that sets the scene for what we're trying to do. And I very much welcome you here, but now I'd like to pass over to an important person who's the Executive Director of the Libraries, Ujjwala Satko, to lead us through the program.
Thank you, Sue. I'm no less important than everybody else here in this room, but thank you very much for setting the scene and the background and the history and what is it that we are planning for the UCT Press. But in observing all the protocols this afternoon, I want to also say that this is a very tangible example of how academic libraries are evolving and how open access is challenging the established academic publishing paradigm, as well as driving the adoption of new roles within the publishing value chain. The emergent library as publisher role is one such dynamic role that we have adopted at UCT Libraries. The success hereof has seen the publication of books that have surpassed all expectations in terms of scope and reach. Hence, this new partnership between the university and its libraries to locate the reconceptualized press within UCT Libraries is something that we have welcomed as libraries. From the library's perspective, we have provided sufficient support to ensure that the press is now launched and is effectively functioning. It also gave us the opportunity to explore partnerships, additional partnerships that could effectively make this a huge success, not only for us, but for the university. To take the discussion of open publishing and its different facets and implications further, a panel discussion facilitated by Associate Professor Polo Moji will now follow. Polo is the Associate Professor and Literary Scholar who works in both English and French. Her books include Gender and the Spatiality of Blackness in Contemporary Afro-French Narratives, published with Routledge in 2022, and the co-edited volume, Cinematic Imaginaries of the African City, also published by Routledge in 2023. She is currently co-editing a collective volume on African feminisms and is the principal investigator for the National Research Foundation funded project, African Literary Cities, Hubs, Maps, and Literary Urban Ecologies in collaboration with the African Center for Cities. Polo, I now hand over to you for your panel discussion.
Thank you everybody. I want to thank, first of all, Sue for really setting the platform and really getting us to understand what the stakes are today. It is a very big day that many people have been working towards. I've had the pleasure of joining the editorial board fairly recently, 2022, and I'm really pleased to present not only our panel discussion today, which I think really focuses on the intellectual project and the ethics of publishing that Sue outlined. So the panel discussion will be on the social justice imperatives of African academic publishing. Obviously, this draws on the fact that we're not only a university press, but also have an open access option. And so we'll think about how publishing works as a tool for transformation and sustainability in national and continental contexts. And in this brief, it's a huge topic, but in this brief 30-minute conversation, I have the pleasure of introducing my fellow members on the UCT Press Board, starting with Divine Fu, Director of the Institute for Humanities Africa, HUMA, where he's also a lecturer in social anthropology. Before that, and this is really important, he was head of publications and dissemination at the Council for the Development of Social Science Research in Africa, CODESRIA, from 2017 to 2019. Divine is a founding managing member of Langa Research and Publishing and has been chair of the Council for the Management of Africa Books Collective. He's currently co-chair of the Global Africa Group, GAG, of the World Universities Council. Thank you, Divine. The next panelist, Joe Battersby, is a geographer whose work focuses on food systems and food security, predominantly in the urban African context, and a member of the UCT Press editorial board and management board. She works on policy, NGO and in policy, NGO and activist spaces to build more equitable and sustainable food systems. And her co-edited books include the Rutledge Handbook to Urban Food Governance, Urban Food Systems Governance and Poverty in Africa, and Tomatoes and Taxi Ranks. So you see there's a diversity of perspectives here. And finally, very pleased to present Reggie Raju, who is currently Director of Research and Learning Services at UCT, and an NRF C2 rated researcher with a specialization in open access. Since moving to UCT in 2013, he has been instrumental in the restructuring of UCT Libraries, restructuring to give them greater prominence to open access publishing. And in this new structure, the Scholarly Communications Office is split into the repository arm and the publishing arm, and within that publishing arm further divided into journal publishing and monograph publishing, which is where you see the fit then with UCT Press. My panelists will have 6 to 8 minutes each to sort of speak to questions that I have curated, thinking about their particular profiles. Unfortunately, there's not a panel where there'll be a panel discussion, so I'll just wrap up the threads at the end. And I will start, I suppose, in the order that we have here, starting with Divine, really speaking from this greater continental context to elaborate on the current dynamics of African academic publishing, this current landscape, and how social justice speaks to the intellectual project of an Africa-based university such as ours, and UCT Press in particular, particularly with the challenge of disseminating African-produced knowledge in the international publishing landscape.
And thank you, colleagues, for being here. Mine, I think, is just a very small intervention, and it's to show the relationship between power and knowledge production, which I think for those who are fanatics of Michel Foucault, you would see Foucault emphasize this a lot, that there is a very strong relationship between knowledge production and power. And last week I was speaking at the meeting of librarians and others in South Africa, and I was asking to imagine colonization without writing, and to imagine empire, without books or without the printing press. It's almost inexistent, because it is the documenting and also the control of knowledge that enables a force to be able to control you. It controls the ideas, it controls how people think about you, it controls how people organize you, it also controls how people read you over time. So knowledge production is a very important aspect of any place's geopolitical strategy. And as a country, and as an institution, and as a continent, if one does not invest in knowledge production, we can change the curriculum as much as we want. We can change lecturers and professors as much as we want. Still, we're doing what Pauline Otanji calls extroversion. So if we want to dominate the world, which is something that we should aspire for, it is really important that we invest in infrastructure such as publishing. And when you look across the continent and you see what has challenged institutions to grow and to establish themselves, it is the absence of having control over knowledge production. Because having no control over that means you cannot have control over what quality is. You cannot have control over what concepts are, about what theory is, about what methodology is. Because peer review, for example, is I see peer review as propaganda, as a very important tool for propaganda. By determining how you peer review something, you're trying to frame a particular narrative. Being an editor is framing a particular narrative. Being a managing editor, being a copy editor is framing a particular narrative. So if you look at the continent, especially early 1980s, one of the first casualties of structural adjustments were university presses. When universities were faced with austerity, the first places they closed university presses, libraries, and subscriptions to many other places. We also see it in this institution, that as soon as we face a challenge, the first place we attack knowledge production, which is actually the place where we actually impose ourselves. So if you look at the continent, recent study shows that out of 52 publishers who claim to be operating, the study by Leusha and also Francois van Schalkwijk, only about 16 actually operate. Out of 52 university presses, only 16 operate. And it tells you the challenge, of we want to produce knowledge, we want to create knowledge, but all of this knowledge is actually outsourced. And we see the competition now, not that we don't have friends or we don't like many publishers outside, but we see lots of the publishers begin to claim lots of journals. Many journals on this campus are published either with Routledge, with Elsevier, with many other publishers. Not that it's not important, but actually what we're doing is outsourcing and extroverting. So a press like UCT Press is really key, for our geopolitical positioning. It's really key for how we want to imagine society. It's really key for any project, whether it's a state project or a transformation project that we need to undertake. And I think across the continent, it's that relationship that we need to see. Some of the few publishers who are publishing on the continent are really facing this huge challenge, that there's such huge demand. When I took over as head of publications in Codestria, I had a backlog of 1,000 manuscripts, to deal with, because there's an increase in in PhDs and increased demand for students to publish, also for lecturers to publish, but very few spaces to curate that. So very few spaces are having this pressure, and we're seeing many people outsource that, externally. And then you also have lots of promotion criteria across the continents. They require you to publish outside. So I remember I was debating this, whether UCT Press constitutes an international press, given that it's located, on the African continent. Many institutions across the African continents require their professors to publish outside of the continent, meaning that there is no patronizing of the presses that we have. And when professors have excellent manuscripts, they take them outside the continent, and when they have a manuscript that's struggling, they bring it, to presses on the continent. So we really need to shift this mindset, and dominating the world, writing ourselves in the world, means we have to do that in two ways: quantity. So even if you have a bad manuscript, you have to bring it to us, because every time somebody references something around the world, they must reference us. And every time you have a good manuscript, you have to bring it to us, because we need to manage those. Have quantity in order to dominate, and then have quality in order to begin to define the concepts. And I think that relationship between knowledge production and power is something that we have to take very seriously. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think you've done very well in terms of time, so I'm going to, in setting up the geopolitical stakes then of our presence here today, and of the relaunch of UCT Press. And I think I'll go to Jane to think more specifically as not only a member of the board, but as somebody who's a producer of knowledge within this institution, within the South African landscape, academic landscape, talking to the African continent, and to a wider audience, but as well as thinking about accessibility of their work to Africa-based researchers, because I don't know how many of you have had to buy information about South Africa or even Africa, and had to buy it in pounds or euros, and it is infuriating. So I think, Jane, if you could take that away and think about UCT's renewed focus on knowledge produced in, for, and from Africa, and comment on that as a social justice imperative, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the question, and thanks to everybody for being here. So I work in a field that's expanding in interest. The urban food security world is quite a small world, but it's definitely growing, and there's a lot of interest from international organizations and international funders to get involved in the work. And so sometimes we are conducting research projects in South Africa, Kenya, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and there's competing researchers from North America, from Europe. And they're producing knowledge that often has quite a different politics to what we're talking about, often has a different understanding, a different conceptual framework to where we're working with. And yet they're publishing open access all the time, because that's the institutional culture where they're from. Their funding sources give them money to do that. Their institutions provide them money to do that. And so the narrative that gets put out into the world remains the narrative that's coming from those sources, even though we're doing comparable work at the same time. And so there's something around open access and being able to step on equal footing to those seemingly sort of global north knowledge producers. It's about making sure that our perspectives are getting equal footing, our politics, our contextual understandings are coming to the fore. So I think a lot of it is just recognizing the open access tide has turned, and we need to get on board in order to make our voices as audible. In the most recent book we did, we took a very serious intent to make sure that we had equal representation from scholars from the global north and global south, to try and balance and to bring these things into conversation. In the dedication, we dedicated the book to, I think it was all future thinkers and doers in the field. But our book cost 3,500 Rand. So where are those thinkers and doers going to be based? Our co-producers in University of Cardiff are going to be able to get that book. Our co-producers at Maseno in Kisumu are not going to be able to. And so it is really about, making sure that we're equally producing the knowledge, equally disseminating the knowledge in order to generate the next generation of scholars. And the way things are at the moment is simply not allowing that. So it's about providing new opportunities for voice, new opportunities for readers to then have the aspiration to produce the knowledge. And so, like I say, it provides an opportunity for our students to engage on material in ways that haven't necessarily been in place. It puts our materials on equal footing to that of the recognized scholars, with a very strong kind of framing of what recognized scholars actually means. And we've seen it, you know, when I provide my students with readings that have been produced by myself or the team, two things happen. The first thing is they think I'm a rampant egomaniac, but the second thing is that it gives the aspiration that we too can create knowledge. We too can speak from where we're from. And so there's something around this open access mandate that positions our work, that makes it accessible, and provides that aspirational space that others can also step into it. Finally, obviously, it rapidly increases our readership and potential citation, which increases voice and reputation, and we have to acknowledge that citations also have personal benefits that accrue. So I think there's a self-interest to this as well. And then my final set of points is around transformative change. So the work that I do, you know, is designed to shape the academic discourse, but it's also designed to shape the policy discourse and the activist space. So, you know, in order to do this, we need to be able to speak to local and national governments, to the NGO sector, to the activist spaces. And what we've tended to do is translate our work into more accessible forms. So we do podcasts and videos and policy briefs and media exchanges. But we've realized that only has legitimacy if there's the academic work to back it up, and if we're able to make that academic work accessible. And so the final aspect of why I think open access is really important is it takes the potential for the conversation to extend outside of the academy. It provides legitimacy to our studies, it provides scope for future conversations. Not necessarily that they're all going to read it, but at least they've got it, and it provides that legitimacy to the work we're trying to do. So in closing, yeah, the open access tide has turned, and I really think there's an opportunity for us as an African press to ensure that the African voice gets out into the research and public community in a greater way.
Thank you. Many thanks for that, Jane. I think there's something that you also bring in there. I think the sort of the notion of an ethics of publishing is coming through also quite strongly, right? An ethic that is linked to an ethics around access, located knowledge, and positionality, and an acknowledgement of positionality. I know that Reggie's presentation has PowerPoint with it, so I don't know if we're ready with the PowerPoint just yet, or would you like to get started immediately? Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I think the first question that Paulo has posed was dealt with the issue of how do we meet the demands of the students. And I'm going to be a lot more granular than my other two colleagues. I would like to start by providing some context for how UCT Library supports the teaching and learning agenda using an open access model. The model adopted and adapted by UCT Libraries is underpinned by social justice principles, especially when it comes to the publication of journals and books. Currently, the Global North conceptualized and rolled out open access interventions, and the embedded biases in the scholarly publishing ecosystem exacerbates the divide between the information rich and the information poor. UCT Libraries is pursuing a transformative worldview of the open access movement that supports inclusion, demarginalization, and most importantly for me, the de-northernization of the publishing ecosystem. UCT Libraries' preference, as indicated by Sue, is diamond open access. That is, there is no cost to the reader, nor is there a cost to the authors. This preference has at its epicenter social justice principles. the question that was posed is, how does open access meet the needs of the students? And that includes a decolonized and affordable quality education. Using the medium of the constitutional law for students textbook, I would reflect on how this publication addresses the challenges that law students have to navigate. One, the unaffordable costs of prescribed textbooks, the dense legal language, and two, guidance on responding to questions that are posed in examinations. The book was written by students for students. And I need to state categorically that academic rigor was not compromised in this process. The book had been peer-reviewed by 2 constitutional law judges, a senior professor teaching the course at another institution, and the students had peer-reviewed the book. So what was achieved? The book is now available free, and this is a critical issue that our students are currently facing. They cannot afford to buy prescribed textbooks. And this is not unique to South Africa. This is an international challenge. The book is written in a language that is more understandable. And third, the book has an audio version for students who prefer to listen as opposed to reading. Since publication in January 2020, the book has solicited more than 192,000 downloads. 67% of that is from within South Africa, and the balance is from 154 other countries across the world, and this includes global north countries. As you could see, in the months preceding the examination, if you look at September 2021, it was over 12,000. In October 2022, it was over 10,000. And in May 2023, we were over 12,000. So I think one can safely infer that students are using this book in preparation for examinations. The next question is, does this book address institutional imperatives? Here I'm looking at the publication and its correlation with student pass rate. I acknowledge that there are numerous variables that contribute to student success. The average pass rate of black students during the course for the period 2016 to 2018 was 65%. And the average for the period 2020 to 2022 was 74%. And as shown in the graph, there is an inferred correlation between downloads and the pass rate for the years 2021 and 2022. The pass rate for these 2 years was 80%. So quickly, just to summarize, right, in terms of this particular book, we are open access compliant using Diamond Open Access. Equity we've dealt with in terms of ease of read, in terms of second language or further students. Written by students, for students. If you're talking about the issue of inclusion, and there's an audio format. For the visually impaired, there is further support. Expanded reading, we have another 192,000 downloads. Development, we're now growing the next generation of academics. And empowerment, society has now access to this particular book. The second question that was posed related to, do we see ourselves becoming a premier open access academic publisher on the continent? following through on the open access, on the social justice agenda, UCT Press seeks ways to deconstruct. We have to deconstruct the biased scholarly publishing ecosystem and reconstruct that ecosystem to address African imperatives. The goals that we need to look at is addressed by Peter Suba, who says, and I quote, "The idea of open access is to stop thinking of knowledge as a commodity to meter out to deserving customers, and to start thinking of it as a public good, especially when it is given away by the authors and funded by public money." Publishing on the Continental Platform, which is something that was created by UCT, provides opportunities for Africans to share the scholarship devoid of global North bias. This and other leadership elements coalesce on our journey to becoming a premier open access publisher on the African continent. However, our mandate as a publisher must speak to the aspirations of the authors. Researchers embark on the publication process with the goal of having their work acknowledged and built on. UCT Press is in the process of consolidating the various elements that contribute to maximizing visibility and discoverability, feeding positively to the goals of being acknowledged. Even though it is a global North dictate, currently the only viable measures of success of open content are the downloads and citations. There is evidence that show that open content solicits more than 66% more downloads than closed content. This affirms our decision to transition to open. There is an assumed correlation between discoverability and accessibility and downloads and citations. Research has shown that open access content generates citations within 9 to 12 months of becoming accessible openly, while closed content takes between 24 and 36 months. We should not forget about UCT's social responsiveness commitment. Open access makes research accessible to anyone that has access to the internet. It transcends academic affiliation and supports sustainable lifelong learning. Paul, I presume I can carry on for a couple more minutes. What I've tried to put together here are all of the critical elements to advance the breadth and depth of open access. And this infrastructure has been built by UCT Press, and it provides distinct possibilities of it becoming a premier publisher on the African continent and meeting the aspirations of the researchers. What we have here is basically, I've tried to separate the production and dissemination from the networking and partnerships. In terms of the production and dissemination, all of the critical elements have been put together. We have a very strong relationship with PKP, and for those colleagues that are going to stay on, you could see there is a short video from PKP supporting this. And there is an ecosystem that feeds content that are published open into institutional repositories, and that expands the options of discoverability. The second component here is looking at the commercial products that we have to improve discoverability, and that is we have a subscription with Crossref and we have a subscription with ORCID. So these two entities ensure, again, the improved visibility of the authors and your content. And then we have accreditation bodies like the Directory of Open Access Journals and the Directory of Open Access Books. There is a request from the Directory of Open Access Books for us, UCT, to become a hub on the African continent. And then we have a relationship with African Sun Media, who will pick up those skills that we don't have. Then we're looking at partnerships. We have the Open Book Collective. Again, there is a short clip from the Open Book Collective encouraging the fact that we need to stay open and continue on this journey so that our scholarship becomes accessible to everybody that wants access. And then we have relationships with the different Spark organizations. We have relationships with Redelijk America. We're talking about Global North, so we're talking about Redelijk. In terms of Redelijk America, we're working with South America. And then we have a very strong ally in the Association of African Universities. Paulo, 2 minutes more, Paulo. Okay.
Then I have to wrap.
Right.
Yes.
Just again, I just want to demonstrate, because I've said all of this. Is there any proof that publishing open does make your content more accessible? And here I've taken the book by one of our senior professors, and in the 1 year this book has become open, it has solicited 4,491 downloads. That is phenomenal, even by his own admission. If you stay again, you watch the video, you would see he never thought that he would have so many downloads of this particular book, and it is across the world. Okay. Paulo, you're intimidating me, Paulo. Now you need to. Yeah. Look, in closing, I want to just to say that we have put together a model that I firmly believe that takes us on a path of becoming a premier open access publisher on the African continent. Thanks for accommodating me, Paulo.
And thank you so much, Reggie. I think what you've done is you've taken, sometimes called in abstract terms like production and dissemination, and grounded them really concretely in thinking about not just knowledge, but around affordability, around access, about an ethics once again, that is about our students also, about very student-focused and in terms of thinking of the barriers that we live with in our context. I mean, I don't know how many of you have tried to buy books for your research and find that you cannot afford everything, even if you are in a well-salaried, well-paid job, let alone students, right? The import taxes and things like that render knowledge inaccessible. And therefore, how do you change? How do you engage with knowledge? How do you produce new knowledge if you cannot access it to begin with? So I'm really glad that you use those really concrete examples of not just of the flow in terms of what open access means in that direction, but also what it means for writers, and showing us through very concrete deliverables, right? In terms of, because we don't write for ourselves. We don't write to show to your friends. You write for your work to be read. As Jane pointed out, you write for your work to move in the world in certain ways, inflect policy, inflect discussions that are happening in your domain. And as Divine quite rightly pointed out, it's also the geopolitical stakes are there. And for too long, we've been considered a site for study. You know, others come and they study and they theorize our lives and our context, and then they go off and write beautiful books that we don't recognize ourselves in. Or sometimes we read those books and we understand from our positionality what the gaps are, what the lack of nuance is, and yet that is what then gets transmitted in the classroom. I really liked your claim around teaching what we produce. It reminds me of Professor Harry Karuba, who always said that teach yourself, teach your colleagues, teach the work. Why? And even Pumlatola once said to me, why do people spend so much time battling with, I don't know, to understand the Derrida, and yet they will not wrestle with like rape is South African nightmare. Just wrestle with it, right? So that idea that there's a labor of engagement, that an engagement with our work, that is situated knowledge, that I think is part of the social justice imperative, not just through the open access platform, yes, but also as a university publisher, as a space that disseminates, produces, curates knowledge, and is part of that flow in terms of shaping narrative, right? We know that we are in a space where there is a very dominant global north narrative, right? And we know that there are multiple global south narratives that are out there that we can reflect. So, and one last thing I do want to say is that following from this seminar and this sort of panel, we will be having rollout events into next year, smaller seminar spaces where we'll bring people in via humor, normally, to sort of have discussions and continue the discussion and roll out the UCT Press intellectual, ethical, project across the university. Thank you very much. And I think the next, I've forgotten the program, yes. Thanks to our panelists, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Paulo, Divine, Jane, and Reggie. And I think from a library's perspective as well, that the university community here at UCT can be very reassured that your publications are in good hands, the academic rigor will not be compromised, and that the library has researched this, has explored this, and has engaged concertedly with partners around the world to conceptualize the library as publisher model, and has brought that skill and talent and network to the UCT Press model as well. So I think we're on a good wicket here. So I'm looking forward to this. Colleagues, at this stage, it gives me great pride to introduce our keynote speaker, Professor Crane Sudeen, who was a former DVC here at UCT, and I believe in his portfolio, he focused on student affairs, transformation, and social responsiveness, and also still holds the position of Emeritus Professor here. He's also the former Chief Executive Officer of the Human Sciences Research Council and honorary professor in the Center for the Advancement of Non-Racialism and Democracy at the Nelson Mandela University. An A-rated researcher, Professor Sudeen's publication record spans the authoring and co-authoring of more than 180 articles, reviews, reports, and book chapters in areas of research interest that include social difference, culture, education policy, comparative education, educational change, public history, and popular culture. He is a fellow of several local and international academies and serves on the boards of a number of cultural, heritage, education, and civil society structures, with the most recent being his installation as the president of the Cornerstone Institute. Colleagues, it's my pleasure to invite Professor Sudeen to address you. But immediately after him, our Vice Chancellor Interim will share his thoughts, perspectives, and opinions on this matter of UCT Press as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me, Juta. And let me say before I dive into this talk that I was the chair of the UCT Press board before before I left, and I had a lot to do with thinking about what we were going to do with this relationship with Juta Press. So thank you, Reggie. Thanks for asking me to be here, and I want to say it's a real honor. Lovely to see Diane, Sue, Redney. Really great. What I'm going to do, colleagues, is just make a couple of high-level points. I'm going to be talking about the idea of a university press in the main. I completely concur with everything that our panel, Divine and Jane and Reggie, have said, and so I'm not going to go in that direction. Let's take that as a principled point of departure for how this particular project will work. So I want to talk about what's going on with the presses around the world, with university presses, and try and enter this big discussion which wasn't touched on here about the economics, because I think that's the elephant in the room. And it's something that I think that we are going to repeatedly have to come to terms with. So, about these university presses, some of you may have seen it, but the Times Higher Education newspaper ran a feature in October 2019 entitled, "What is the Point of a University Press?" Anybody see it? It was effectively that particular article stimulated by things that had developed at two university presses. One, the university press at Stanford in the US, and the other one at Melbourne University in Australia. At Stanford, the management had made the decision, despite in that year boasting an endowment, and if you can get your head around it, of $26.5 billion. I mean, that was the endowment. It's the third biggest globally. Despite that endowment, that it was going to cut the subsidy of $1.7 million it was giving the press. So you just do the maths. I don't know what the proportions are, but that they were getting edgy about the 1.7 million. And it caused a huge big uproar at the university. But the point was, the press and the university had to explain that this press, established in 1892, was operating at a loss. At Melbourne, the issue is slightly different, and I'll come to it a little later on. And it's not without consequence for us here. The press decision was not to publish general interest non-fiction books. Again, it was partly explained by wanting to cut costs. And the effect of that was to essentially halve the subsidy that the university was making to the press. Now, of course, the issues in these two things are quite different. At Stanford, it was about straight financial viability. Melbourne, it was about, and I'll come to this a little, about whose cause the press should be prioritizing. The niche interests of the university's own academics, and there's a niggle of an issue there, that the press should be servicing the primary interests of people inside of the university. I get a little anxious about that. One of the reasons why I kind of avoided going with UCT Press, also for a a long time. As opposed to the interests of a wider public. So insider academics, interests you want to be promoting versus the big question of whose interests in the wider public may be of greater substance. But different as these issues are, in question we have here oh, I see.
Sorry about that.
I'll put it on the floor.
Okay.
So the question is what is the purpose of the university press? Now, that question doesn't have an easy answer. It's not an answer that comes in these ringing tones of what the noble purpose of a university is. There isn't what I call a constitutive explanation. Certainly not in the stories of the world's two great and dominant publishers, Cambridge University Press and Oxford University Press. Cambridge University Press received its letters of patent in 1534 from that wonderful man, King Henry VIII. Wonderful man. I don't know how much you know about him, but I would not want him as a relative. Making it the world's oldest university press. But it doesn't have an explanation in these letters of patent about nobility, about in some ways making an argument about the value, the virtue of a press. The motives were quite ordinary. You see that again with Oxford University Press, which came just a couple of decades later. Oxford University Press got its rights to operate through a petition to the King of England, that same king, by its Vice-Chancellor to compete with the big printers of the time. That was the motivation. And those printers were the Stationers' Company and the King's Printer. And so it got its charter in 1636. And that charter was, you can print all manner of books. That's what its founding mandate was, to print all manner of books. And it did. Its most popular and successful title was the King James Bible, which brought the university substantial returns every year for over 250 years. So it and Cambridge University Press were essentially businesses, and the press's most successful publishers, and they worked out in determining this success what would sell and bring in the kinds of returns which shareholders, and there were shareholders, which the university was one, their shareholders would appreciate. And let me just say to you that last year, Oxford University Press was able to give back to the University of Oxford in the order of something like 800 million. Quite extraordinary. But I'm very pleased to say that that's not where the discussion is. We're a little more high-minded now about what we want out of these university presses. Even Cambridge University Press now. Cambridge University Press now has for itself this rationale, this explanation, and it comes in three reasons. Firstly, that having a press adds gravitas to the parent institution through the publication of high-quality research. Secondly, having this press promotes the academics in the institution. And lastly, it offers the wider public access to important scientific and intellectual breakthroughs and discussions taking place at the university. So most of us now will use that as our rationale. will explain ourselves in one of these three kinds of ways. And when you read the websites of these university presses around the world, they're in one of those arguments, making one of those arguments in one form or another. I would broadly go along with what these arguments, but would want to start thinking in the way in which you folks have been thinking here now. Thinking in very much more contextualized ways about how a press situated here can begin to, be thinking about itself. I'll come to that in a second, but before I do, I just want to say something about the money. A European Commission report published in 1929 about academic publishing says that, and I'm quoting now, universities, and this is really interesting, have partially and gradually disengaged from their roles as publishers in recent times. This is particularly so in the hard sciences. Where presses continue is where they are competitive in the wider commercial publishing market, and important to emphasize in the humanities and the social sciences. And the reason for this disengagement is essentially around the weakening of the business model. I've been very involved in this discussion since UCT, Sandy, you will remember. So we did in 2015 a survey of our presses in this country, and not a single one of them was financially viable. Every single one of them had to depend on incredible subvention. And all of that has been complicated by the advent of these new technologies. And it's not clear, reading these discussions about what's going on, whether these new models make things cheaper. It's not clear. But the big issue about these technologically driven times in which we find ourselves is that where just a decade ago an academic book in the US or the UK would be expected to sell over 1,000 copies, today, putting this question of financial viability into perspective, publishers do well if they sell 200 copies. So the whole dynamic has shifted. What has happened as a consequence, as all of us know, is that book prices have ratcheted up incredibly. More significantly, publishers have shifted onto digital platforms, and we've had in the last 10 years, and this is not a negligible point to be making, you've seen these presses diversifying and experimenting around the world in ways that are incredibly innovative. And they're incredibly innovative largely around the objective of remaining financially viable. Some of these presses have taken on the commercial presses, and they are beginning to publish popular books, taking on major fiction authors. So a big fiction author as a seller comes on to these presses rosters, if you like, a roster. He or she writes for us, and it's used in that kind of advertising way. And it's worked for some people. Others are going into business. Chicago University Press, which is a very successful press, now not only publishes, but it also has gone into the distribution business. It distributes books, but it's also beginning to take over the management and the running of professional associations. So they take big associations, and American associations have multiple tens of thousands of members, and they manage their membership, manage the ways in which these people go to conferences, they organize their conferences or not, and so on. And they have become a kind of one-stop shop, a kind of hub. And it's really interesting watching a press like Chicago University Press, really interesting. So where are we in this space? We're small players. What is counted as a mid-sized press in the rest of the world is decidedly not who we are. Manchester University Press, which thinks of itself as a mid-sized press, as does Stanford, puts out about 200 titles a year. Stanford, about 150. Even when we get pushed to produce 30 is a lot. Hey, isn't it? Yeah. At UCT Press, it was that margin was about 20 books a year. So we are, in these comparative terms, small players. But it's really important to say that even here, the experimentation is exciting. Your process is exciting, and I'm very glad that we have a relationship with you, even if it is as a vendor. But as you know, new presses are emerging all over the place. Nelson Mandela, which we're involved with, is attempting to mount a university press. UJ is pretty much along the way in doing so, as has UWC expressed an interest in this. The point is that presses around the world have evolved into all kinds of animals. But I think the defining thing about them, critical, almost everywhere, is that this question of financial sustainability is what they're all having to deal with, all of them. And this then brings us to thinking about the future and asking the question whether we should hold on to a press at all costs. Should you be defending having a press if it's the last thing that you want to do? The answer clearly is that we have to be pragmatic about this. If an institution is facing the prospect of financial ruin, there's no ethical question about holding on to an entity such as a press. Absolutely none. It's not your priority. But I want to say in closing, there's absolutely no question about trying as hard as you can. Because the critical contribution which this institution plays inside of the university, and hopefully not just for its own members of staff, critically what it does is to keep open, and I want to say beyond decolonization, to keep open a space of intense inquiry. No other press is as easily going to make that commitment. A university press can. So it's not the financial question which I'm pushing here, it's this question of the boundaries of what we know and why pushing these boundaries is so absolutely vital for the survival of the planet. If we don't get what is being worked out around water deficient agricultural zones and how you begin to cultivate in spaces like that and put it out in the open, we're done for. It might seem like an arcane question to some, but it is of deep, deep significance for our future. And it's only going to come out of the university. And so you have to promote this thing. And so we have to be absolutely, I'd say to you, vigilant about openness. So the story about Melbourne is not a great one. Melbourne wants to close its university press because somebody published a book in the university press which was critical of an archbishop who was protecting sexual abusers. And suddenly the discussion became a financial one. How easily that financial question was appropriated to be able to serve this cause of interest. So I'm going to say we have a real task on our hands here, because unlike the University of Melbourne, unfortunately, which is a whole lot more wealthy than we are, I don't know how many of you have been there, you know, it's a great university, really great, but they have resources. We don't. And what we're having to do here is do this kind of work of keeping this openness, this spirit of inquiry going in an atmosphere of, in some ways, call it modest resources, in some ways, quite desperate resourcing questions. How do you do that? I mean, how do you keep alive, and this is the great thing that we have here, we have these great, and it's wonderful to be acknowledging them, these great scientists in our ecosphere in this country who punch way, way, way above their weight. Way, way above their weight in the world. I mean, how do you keep these folks not only optimistic about the projects in which they're involved, but out there engaging in the conversation globally about these issues and these problems with these very impoverished circumstances out of which they come? I don't know. I really don't know. So I've seen that model that you've put there, Reggie. I really would like to see how it's going to work. But I want to say to Daya and Sue here, please don't make the first mistake, a Melbourne alibi. Because mistakes are going to be made quickly. And I'm asking that you have the courage to be able to stay the course, to be able to hold on to this particular role that we play here of talking into the world from this vantage point where we can see things that other people can't see. We really do. Particularly around these questions of inequality now, in which I am involved, to be able to draw attention to the blind spots of the ways in which our northern neighbours, but also us ourselves, come to think and understand, you know, what these futures hold for us. So we're going to stumble, but I'm going to ask here that we keep, Ujala, trying to make this work. So my best wishes. So thanks very much for listening to me, colleagues.
Well, Crane, have you been eavesdropping on our budgetary discussions? Hello, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here. And really, I'd like just to, by way of closing, make a few comments about this very, very important development at UCT. So I think that what we've heard today is, in a sense, a re-expression of our commitment across the university to shape and to lead change, in this case through the publication and dissemination of peer-reviewed scholarship published to the highest standards, that's what we've heard, and importantly made available through open access. So UCT Press, my picture of UCT Press is that it is not merely a destination, if you like, for scholarship or a repository, but almost an incubator for the growth of knowledge, for ideas and inspiration. And of course, we've heard this afternoon about a number of distinguishing features of the press, not least of which would be the recognition of its location, well, at UCT, but in Africa and for Africa Voices, for African ideas as well. I believe that the press online catalogue runs to 64 titles. This would, now I know it's very, very small, Crane, as you've indicated, by comparison even with mid-size university presses around the world, but it does present a panorama of scholarship that straddles the disciplines, and I certainly hope that as the press evolves and flourishes, which I'm sure it will do. I have let me say, I've listened to what you had to say, Crane, and I certainly would concur with your view that we must do everything that we can to ensure that the UCT Press does flourish and that it does not become victim to narrow decisions around affordability and the like, because we have to recognize its role and its place in the world of scholarship. So, you know, we've heard the question put, and to some extent responded to, as to why a university should have a press. It is and it can be an important part of the campus, of the university community. It benefits not only the academic community, but also what you might call the global knowledge ecosystem, including anyone around the world who is seeking informed and engaged peer-reviewed scholarship, particularly within the kind of context that the UCT places itself and places its vision and objectives. Also, I think it's worth referring to our world today, you know, which is overloaded with social media content of uncertain reliability, to say the least, dubious intentions, and a world in which we badly and sorely need publishers, publishing houses, presses, editorial boards, and the like that uphold the highest standards of rigor, integrity, and of course of intellectual freedom. So in that sense, I think that the UCT Press is a key contribution to the world of scholarship. And here I would want to make particular mention of the open access format, if you like, of its publications. You know, I've been involved in one way or another with the world of open scholarship, broadly speaking. I have to check myself. I talk all the time about open science, open scholarship, very broadly speaking, within which are components such as open access, open data. You know, we've spent a lot of time engaging with colleagues around the whole business of, you know, don't hold on to your data, make it accessible, findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable, promoting equitable access. And I think that all of this is so important in relation to another one of another area in which we are engaged and ought to be engaged ever more vigorously, which is the whole business of inclusivity. And yeah, I'm referring to the inclusivity, the full participation of our scholars in the Global South in the world of cooperation, collaboration, and scholarship, broadly speaking. We are excluded for a number of reasons, and one of those reasons is the lack of access or equitable access to knowledge and to data. So in that sense, I think that it is so important that the UCT Press is, if you like, founded on this principle of open access, which will pervade everything that it does. I certainly wish you very well. I had not followed all of these developments, but I'm delighted to hear that following the return of the press to UCT by Juta, and that it's got a tinge of ignominy about it. Take it back. I'm delighted to have learned about what has been imagined, what has now come to fruition in a really exciting form. It's all about the question of why have a press. To that, I would add the question: what is it that you would do differently? And I don't have to tell you what it is that UCT Press will do differently. So I have great hopes for the press, and I certainly want to congratulate the members of the board and all of our colleagues who have been involved in bringing UCT Press to this point in its new life. Certainly, Professor Dick Ngambi, thank you, and members of your board, for your steering and your stewardship. And I really would like to call on members of the university community to embrace the opportunities that we now have through UCT Press in all sorts of ways, and also to be open to publishing through the press, to agreeing to serve as reviewers, and to engage in all sorts of other ways. So well done. I'm very pleased about this, and congratulations, and thank you very much.
So thank you, Daya, thank you, Crane, and thanks to our panel for the important inputs into this afternoon session. I think we've heard a bundle of important things: the emergent libraries as a publisher, the importance of knowledge production and sharing in an equitable way, the positioning of who's this press for, the authors or the world at large, the aspiration of the UCT Press as a place to publish our knowledge, and the potential of the UCT Press to eradicate domination in the publication space and to build towards interdependence of knowledges rather than domination of knowledges. So I found this very inspiring. There are many people, and so Crane, I want to refer to your request to us not to take any decisions lightly. I can tell you that the bringing back of UCT Press to UCT has required tenacity of substance. So I think that's a good sign, because it means that we are quite determined about what we're doing. We're determined to build this open access space, to build the online publishing space, but also to allow ways of working with publication that enables different formats. I'd like to thank Dick and his board, who pulled together this space, and Crane refers to how long it's been in the making. I'd like to thank, from the UCT side, our legal minds, Claude Bassadet, for the huge amount of work which was needed to bring the press back and rewrite every contract and make sure that all the authors' contracts were in place. I'd like to thank, right from when the UCT Press sat in the research office, Roshan Sonde, for the servicing of it and for keeping us onto this all the way, never letting it go. And Sandy Shepherd, who's with us today, who has been with Juta, servicing UCT Press for many, many years and has helped us and walked with us in the transition of this press back to UCT. I'd like to thank the staff in the libraries, Reggie, Jill, and Lena Ujala, for the work that you have done in creating this model. African Sun Media for being our partner in this. Juta for holding our baby for 25 years. And the open access partners, their videos from them in their work with what we do. I want to build on what Paula said, that this is not the end of our discussion of UCT Press and how we do things like this, and that there will be a series of webinars continuing. We're trying to think through how to pace them and where to put them, but they will continue, and so please do watch this space. I invite you to, if you haven't looked at the videos which were playing as we walked in, to take a look at them. They're videos of our authors and why they publish, of our stakeholders, and what's important. And then I'd like to thank you for the time that you've spent with us this afternoon. Please do, those of you who are with us, please do stop and have something to eat and chat a little bit. And for those who are online, thank you for spending the time with us, and this is where we'll end our formal proceedings. Thank you.